Send someone else. Kovac snatched the rifle from her hands and threw it onto the hood of the MRAP like it was scrap metal. The clang echoed through the entire motor pool. He stepped into her space chest forward, jaw set, voice filling the room like a verdict. You think they're gonna let a 5-foot nothing hold a long gun in that valley? You'd be dead before your first breath. He turned to his men, arms spread wide, inviting the room to agree. And they did. Every single one of them laughed. 20 soldiers. Not one said stop, not one moved. Wren Halloran stood perfectly still. She looked at her rifle on that hood, and she memorized every face in that room. Subscribe and drop your city in the comments. I want to see how far this story travels. The motor pool at Outpost Halcyon smelled like diesel hot metal and the particular kind of arrogance that collects when too many men spend too much time in a confined space with nothing to prove and no one to prove it to. It was the kind of place where reputations got built or buried, where a single moment could define how a soldier was seen for the rest of their deployment. And on a Tuesday morning in the kind of heat that makes the air itself feel hostile, that moment arrived for Sergeant Wren Halloran, and it arrived with a laugh. She had been standing near the South Vehicle Bay clipboard in hand reviewing the maintenance logs on a MRAP that had developed a persistent hydraulic issue. She wasn't called to stand in the center of the room. She wasn't invited to the conversation that was about to happen. She was simply there doing her job when Staff Sergeant Dale Kovac walked in with 3 of his men behind him like a personal audience, and everything shifted the way atmospheres shift before a storm, subtly at first, and then all at once. Kovac was the kind of soldier who had never had to fight for the room. It came to him naturally, the broad shoulders, the jaw that looked like it had been carved from something deliberately hard, the voice that carried without effort across any space he entered. He had 12 years and 2 combat deployments, a chest full of the right ribbons, and the absolute certainty of a man who had never once been told he didn't belong somewhere. That certainty had calcified over the time into something less admirable. It had become assumption. An assumption left unchecked becomes contempt. He saw Wren before she saw him looking. Halloran, he said. Not a greeting, a declaration. She looked up from the clipboard. Staff Sergeant. He tilted his head the way a man does when he's already decided the answer to a question he hasn't asked yet. Tell me something. They really putting you on sniper support for the Bravo rotation? She held the clipboard steady. That's the assignment. Kovac turned to his men, slowly, deliberately, and then he laughed. It wasn't a polite laugh. It wasn't even a spontaneous one. It was the calculated kind, the laugh of a man who knew his audience and knew exactly what sound would land the hardest. Private Yates, 22 years old, eager to belong, laughed first because that's what you do when the senior man sets the tone. Corporal Riggs followed, and then Specialist Dre, and suddenly the motor pool was full of the sound of men finding something hilarious that wasn't funny at all. Sniper support, Kovac repeated, drawing the words out. That's what they're sending now. 5 foot nothing. He made a gesture with his hand palm flat, hovering at a height designed to make a point. What are you going to do out there, sweetheart? Shoot at their knees. More laughter, louder this time. Wren did not move. She did not put the clipboard down. She did not raise her voice. She did not flush red with embarrassment or go white with rage. She simply looked at Dale Kovac the way a mathematician looks at an equation, not with emotion, but with the quiet, total attention of someone who was already solving for the answer. She noted the way his left shoulder dropped slightly when he turned for his audience until she cataloged it without thinking. She noted the exact cadence of his cruelty, the way he timed the pauses for maximum impact. She noted Yates, who laughed the loudest, but whose eyes went slightly uncertain afterward, like he was already half aware he'd done something he'd regret. She noted Riggs, who kept his gaze on the floor after the first 30 seconds. And she noted Dre, who was the only one who actually thought it was funny, which told her something important about Dre. She filed all of it. Send someone else, Kovac said, shaking his head, addressing the room now more than her. I'm serious. I'll put in the request myself. We don't send a 5-foot nothing to a long gun. It's not about being mean. It's about being real. He spread his hands like a man offering reason. Am I wrong? Nobody in that motor pool said yes. Nobody said no. The silence held the specific shape of collective cowardice, the moment when a group of people know something is wrong and choose each individually to let it happen anyway. Wren set the clipboard down on the hood of the MRAP. RAP. She looked at Kovac one more time, not with anger, not with hurt, with the expression of someone who has already moved past this moment and is thinking about the next one. "I'll have the hydraulic report on your desk by 1400, she said, and she walked out. The laughter followed her to the door. She didn't let it follow her past it. Outside, the desert heat hit her like a flat hand, immediate and without apology, and she walked across the gravel lot toward the far end of the compound where the air smelled less like diesel and more like dust and distance. Her boots were steady on the ground. Her breathing was controlled. She had learned that from her grandfather a long time ago. The first and most important lesson of precision work: your body is an instrument, and you do not let noise interfere with a calibrated instrument. His name was Frank Halloran, and he had been a quiet man in the way that only men who've survived significant things manage to be quiet. He had a ranch on a flat, wind-hammered stretch of the high plains where the horizon was so wide and so unbroken that it felt less like a view and more like a statement. He had raised Wren from the age of 8 after her mother left, and her father decided that leaving was easier than staying. And he had never once in all those years told her that anything was too hard for her. What he told her instead was something different. Stillness first, he used to say. They'd be lying in the grass, the wind coming across the plain in long, uneven waves, the rifle steady between his hands and then between hers. Everything else is math. She had not fully understood what he meant the first time he said it. She was 10 years old and she thought he was talking about shooting. By the time she was 16 and shooting at ranges most men twice her age couldn't consistently hit, she understood he had been talking about living. About how you move through a world that generates constant noise, people talking, people judging people, filling every available silence with their own insecurity dressed up as authority. How you learn to go still inside all of that. How you let the noise pass through you like wind through grass. And then when the noise is done, you do the math and you take the shot. She thought about Frank Halloran as she walked across the gravel lot at Outpost Halcyon. She thought about his hands on her shoulders when she was 11, adjusting her position at the bench. The way he never grabbed or pulled, but simply placed like suggestion, was more powerful than force, and it always was. She thought about the cold mornings when the wind was bad and the target seemed impossible, and he would sit beside her without speaking, just being there, present and patient. And somehow that presence was enough to remind her that impossible was an opinion and not a fact. She thought about all of this, and she kept walking, and by the time she reached the far end of the compound, she had already decided several things. She had decided that Kovac's opinion of her was data useful in that it told her what she was working against, but not in any way authoritative. She had decided that the men in that motor pool were a problem she would solve not by arguing, but by demonstrating. And she had decided with the cold clarity that had always been her most reliable asset that she was not going to waste a single calorie of energy on anger. Anger was expensive. She had work to do. The next 3 days at Outpost Halcyon were a particular kind of torture that had nothing to do with heat or physical difficulty and everything to do with invisibility. Someone in Wren had a reasonably good idea who had ensured that her duty assignments steered well clear of anything that might allow her to demonstrate what she was actually capable of. The sniper support slot she'd been assigned to vanished quietly into a reassignment. In its place, medbay inventory, supply log audits, vehicle maintenance oversight, tasks that were real necessary, tasks that mattered. She understood that, and she did them without complaint, but tasks that kept her systematically away from a rifle and systematically out of sight. She inventoried medical supplies with the same focus she brought to everything. She cross-referenced supply logs and found 3 discrepancies no one else had caught. She submitted the hydraulic report at 13:58, 2 minutes early, with a secondary recommendation about the brake line tension that turned out to be correct and quietly acknowledged by the motor pool sergeant, who was not Kovac and who had the good sense to notice good work when he saw it. But she was being managed. She knew it. She let herself know it, fully named it clearly inside her own head, without dressing it up as something more tolerable, because she had learned that the first step in solving any problem was refusing to lie to yourself about its shape. On the second day, she met Maren. Maren was a specialist, 26 years old, with eyes that missed very little, and a mouth that said what those eyes found with the kind of directness that some people called blunt and other people called honest, depending entirely on which end of it they were on. She was assigned to signals intelligence support, which meant she spent a great deal of time reading data that other people generated and understanding it better than the people who generated it. She was, in other words, exactly the kind of person who would notice Wren Halloran. She found Wren in the supply room on the second afternoon counting field dressing packages for the third time, not because she'd lost count, but because she'd run out of things to count and didn't want to stand still. "You're the one Kovac ran his mouth about in the motor pool," Maren said. No preamble. Wren looked up. "Probably. He said you got bumped from sniper support. Said you requested reassignment." Wren held Maren's gaze. "I did not request reassignment." Maren nodded, slow and deliberate, like she was confirming something she already knew. "How long have you been shooting?" The question surprised Wren slightly, not the content but the timing, the directness of it, the way Maren asked it, the same way you'd ask someone how long they'd been in the Army, like it was simply a professional qualification. "Since I was 8, Wren said. "Long gun since I was 10. "What range?" "Consistent at 800. Confirmed hits at 1150 with standard conditions." Maren was quiet for a moment. Then she said, "Kovac's best confirmed is 650. Everyone on this base knows that." Wren said nothing. "I'm just pointing out," Maren said, "that there's a certain irony in the situation." "There are a lot of ironies in a lot of situations," Wren said. "I try not to rely on irony. It doesn't do anything." Maren looked at her for a long moment. Then she smiled, not a warm smile exactly, but a real one, the kind that meant she'd decided something. "I'm a spotter. Did my qualifications 2 years ago. Nobody here uses me because they think signals intel is more valuable than a second set of eyes, which depending on the day it might be, but I miss it." She tilted her head slightly. "The range is technically open until 2100. Nobody uses it after 1800 because everyone thinks it's too hot." Wren set down the field dressings. "What time do you get off? 1730? "I'll be there at 1800, Wren said. And that was how it started. The range sessions happened in the hour and a half of desert evening that fell between the day's work and the night's rest, in the specific heat that most of the base had decided was unbearable, and that Wren had decided was simply a variable. She would settle into position on the bench at the far end, and Maren would set up beside her with the wind meter and the spotting scope, and they would fall into a rhythm that felt from the first session like something that had been practiced before, even though it hadn't. Maren called wind corrections with the efficiency of someone who had spent years reading data. She didn't guess, she calculated, and she communicated the calculations in the clipped, precise shorthand of a professional. "Left 2, she'd say, and Wren would adjust without conscious thought, the way breathing is adjusted automatically, the body knowing before the mind catches up. "Dial up point 2, and the scope would move, and the crosshairs would settle, and the trigger would break, and the steel target at the end of the lane would ring with the flat, ringing certainty of a perfect hit." On the third session, Maren stopped calling corrections for 30 seconds and just watched. "You're not thinking about it," she said. "About what?" "The shot. You're not calculating it consciously. You already know it before you pull. How long have you been doing that?" Wren was quiet for a moment. "My grandfather called it reading the whole picture. You stop looking at just the target. You take in everything, the grass, the dust, the way the light is moving, and the shot is already there. You just confirm it." Maren was quiet for a bit. "You know how rare that is." "My grandfather said everyone could do it if they learned stillness first." "Could they?" Wren thought about it. "He believed they could. I think he was wrong about most people, but he was right that it can be taught to the right people." "Are you saying I'm the right people?" Wren glanced at her. "You called a left 2 correction at 850 meters in a variable crosswind based on 15 seconds of observation. What do you think?" Maren laughed, a real one, short and bright. And then she settled back behind the spotting scope and said, "Next target, wind is shifting right." And Wren shot. By the end of the first week, their rhythm was something close to beautiful. Not in the way that beauty is usually described, soft-edged and gentle, but in the way that precision is beautiful, that any system working at its absolute best is beautiful, the particular elegance of 2 people operating as something more coherent than either of them alone. Maren read the wind like she was reading a language she'd been born into. Wren processed the information and converted it into action with a seamlessness that required no gap between receiving data and responding to it. They didn't talk about Kovac on the range. They didn't talk about the base's opinion of Wren's assignment, or lack thereof. Those conversations had happened once, been sufficient, and didn't need to be repeated. What they talked about when they talked was the work itself, trajectory, correction, wind behavior, in the specific geography of the valley, the way heat shimmer affected optical clarity at different distances and different times of day. And what Wren thought about when she was alone at night in the small room that smelled like dust and canvas, and the dry heat that never fully left even after dark was the valley. She had studied the maps. She had done it the way she did everything, methodically, quietly, with the particular intensity of someone who knows that what they're building in their head right now might matter a great deal later. She had looked at the topographic lines and the elevation data and the known enemy activity patterns, and she had calculated instinctively the places where things would go wrong if they went wrong, and the geometry of what would be required to fix them. She had not shared these calculations with anyone. She had not been asked. She had simply done the math, and she had filed it, and she had waited with the patience of a woman raised on a wind-beaten plain, where patience was not a virtue but a survival skill. And she had kept her stillness, and she had let the noise of everyone else's opinions pass through her like wind through grass. And she had remembered every face in that motor pool, not with bitterness, not with the kind of hot, consuming resentment that she'd seen destroy people, eat them from the inside until all they had left was the wound. She had no interest in being consumed. She had remembered those faces the way a navigator remembers landmarks, useful information, filed accurately, available when needed. Kovac, Yates, Riggs, Dre. She remembered the exact angle of Kovac's shoulder when he turned for his audience. She remembered the way Yates's laugh had faltered at the end. She remembered Riggs looking at the floor. She remembered Dre, who thought it was genuinely funny, and what that said about Dre. She remembered all of it, and she returned to her stillness. On the 7th day of her deployment at Outpost Halcyon, Captain Silas Bracken walked into the supply room, where Wren was completing an audit, and he stopped in the doorway, and he looked at her for a long moment before he spoke. Bracken was not a man who filled rooms the way Kovac did. He was quieter in his presence, more considered, a man who had clearly decided a long time ago that the goal was accuracy, not volume. He had deep-set eyes and the specific kind of stillness around the mouth of someone who has learned that most things are better understood before they're spoken about. "Sergeant Halloran," he said. "Sir." "I've been looking at your file." She set down the clipboard. "Yes, sir." "Your marksmanship qualifications, range records, performance reviews from your previous posting." He paused. "You should have been on sniper support from day one. I don't know how that assignment got shuffled, but I intend to find out." Wren held his gaze steadily. "I appreciate that, sir." Bracken studied her for a moment. "You're not going to tell me what happened in the motor pool?" "No, sir." "You're not going to ask me to do anything about Kovac?" "No, sir." He nodded slowly. "Your choice. For now." He turned to leave, then stopped. "Halloran, I want you back on the rotation. Real rotation. I'll have the orders cut by tomorrow." "Understood, sir." He left. Wren picked up the clipboard again. Her hands were completely steady. She thought tomorrow then. She thought everything else is math. And outside the supply room across the base, the desert valley stretched out in its long, indifferent silence. 800 meters of open fire lane, elevated positions to the north and south, the specific geography of a problem she had already solved in her head 6 different ways. She didn't know when she'd be asked to demonstrate those solutions. She didn't know if she'd be asked at all. She knew only that she was ready. She had always been ready. That was the thing no one in that motor pool had understood when they laughed. Readiness is not announced. It doesn't stand in the center of a room and make itself known with volume and certainty and the broad-shouldered confidence of a man who has never once been told he doesn't belong. Readiness is quiet. It sits in a corner of a supply room doing an audit that nobody asked for, finding the discrepancies nobody else caught, filing the information that everyone else overlooked. It waits. It is still. And when the moment comes, and the moment always comes eventually to the person prepared enough to recognize it, readiness does not hesitate. It simply takes the shot. 2 days later, the radio crackled at 0600 with the first reports of contact in the valley, and Outpost Halcyon held its breath, and Sergeant Wren Halloran set down her coffee and stood up and was already moving before the second transmission came through. She was ready. She had been ready since the morning in the motor pool when Dale Kovic laughed. She had been ready in one way or another since she was 10 years old, and her grandfather placed a rifle in her hands on a wind-beaten plane and said the only word she had ever needed, stillness first. Everything else is math. The orders came through at 0700 the next morning, and Wren read them twice, not because she didn't understand them the first time, because she wanted to make sure they were real. Sniper support, Bravo rotation, effective immediately. She folded the paper, put it in her breast pocket, and went to find Maren. She found her in the signals room, headphones around her neck, coffee in hand, already reading something on her tablet, with the focused intensity of someone who had been awake for a while. Maren looked up the moment Wren walked in, and something in the way Wren was standing told her everything before a single word was spoken. Back on rotation, Maren said, effective immediately. Maren set the coffee down. Bracken. Maren was quiet for exactly 2 seconds. Then she said, good, because I've been looking at the valley maps, and there are things about those elevation lines that are bothering me. Wren pulled up a chair. Show me. That was the thing about Maren Okafor that Wren had recognized within the first hour of knowing her. She didn't celebrate things that hadn't happened yet, and she didn't waste time on things that already had. The orders were good news. Good news was noted. And then you moved to the next problem. It was the kind of thinking Wren had spent her whole life surrounded by her grandfather, operated the same way. Moving from one task to the next with the calm efficiency of someone who understood that the world didn't pause to let you feel things before it demanded your attention again. Maren spread the map across the table between them. It was a topographic rendering of the valley that sat approximately 11 kilometers northeast of Outpost Halcyon, the one that the Bravo rotation used as a primary transit corridor for convoy movement. Wren had studied it before. She studied it again now through Maren's eyes, letting the other woman's read of it layer on top of her own. Here, Maren said, pressing her finger to the north ridge line. And here, the south. Both elevated, both with clear sight lines down into the floor. And this section in the middle, she traced a stretch of the valley floor, approximately 800 meters long, is completely open, no cover, one way in, one way out if the south entry is compromised. I know, Wren said. You've already run the geometry. Several times. So, Maren looked at her. And if someone wanted to trap a convoy in that valley, those are the two positions they'd use. And the only counter position with full coverage of both ridge lines simultaneously is the South Tower. Maren pulled her finger back from the map. The South Tower is 300 meters from the nearest vehicle access point. Yes. If you're in the tower and the convoy is compromised, you're separated from extraction. Yes. Maren looked at the map for a long moment. Then she looked at Wren. You've thought about this a lot. I think about geometry, Wren said simply. It's what I do. The day moved forward the way days do at a forward operating base, with a specific grinding momentum of routine that exists partly for operational necessity and partly because routine is the thing that keeps people sane when the alternative is thinking too hard about where they are and what might happen. Wren moved through her duties with the same quiet efficiency she brought to everything, but the orders in her breast pocket had changed something in the air around her. And other people noticed, even if they couldn't have said exactly what they were noticing. Yates noticed. He passed her near the vehicle bay at 0900, and his eyes went to her face and then quickly away, and there was something in that quick look that was different from the laughter of 2 days ago. Not guilt exactly. Yates wasn't old enough or self-aware enough for clean guilt, but something adjacent to it. An awareness that the ground had shifted slightly under his feet, and he wasn't sure how. Riggs said nothing at all when they crossed paths at the mess, which was its own kind of statement. Riggs had been the one who looked at the floor during the motor pool incident. He was the one Wren had calculated most likely to have a conscience working on him. Dre, who had genuinely found it funny, looked at her with the flat indifference of a man who had not yet been required to update any of his assessments. She noted that too. And Kovac was not where she could see him, which meant he was somewhere being told about the orders, and she allowed herself to imagine briefly, and without relishing it, the exact shape of the expression on his face when he heard. She let the image go. It wasn't useful. At 1100, she was at the range. Not with Maren this time. Alone, she wanted to work through something that had been sitting at the edge of her attention since she looked at those valley maps that morning, a specific problem of angle and elevation that the South Tower presented if the target positions were where she and Maren both suspected they might be. She sat up at the bench, went through her pre-fire checks with the automatic thoroughness of 15 years of practice, and began to work. The first shots were warm-up, mechanical, getting the muscles and the eye back into the specific state of calibration that precision shooting requires. The way the musician runs scales, not because the scales are the music, but because the scales are how you arrive at the music. 700 meters, 850. She dialed the adjustments without looking at the turret, reading the numbers by feel, the way a person reads a familiar path by the texture of the ground under their feet. And then she shifted her angle, changed her position relative to the bench to simulate the elevated geometry of the south tower body at the specific incline that a downward shot from that height would require. Shot again. The steel rang, different sound at the elevated angle. She noted it, filed it, adjusted. Shot again. A voice said, "Nice adjustment." She didn't move immediately. She finished the trigger, reset, confirmed the target, and then looked to her right. Captain Bracken was standing 6 feet away, hands in his pockets, watching with the careful attention of a man who understood what he was seeing. She hadn't heard him approach. Most people were loud enough that she heard them without trying. Bracken moved the way he spoke without announcement. "Thank you, sir," she said. "What are you simulating?" She looked at him for a moment, calculating how much to say. Then she decided all of it. South Tower geometry. Downward angle on North Ridge targets at approximately 850 to 900 meters. The elevation change affects bullet drop more than most people account for. Bracken nodded slowly. He walked to the bench and looked downrange, then back at the angle she'd set up at. "You've been thinking about the valley?" "Yes, sir. Specifically about what happens if Bravo convoy runs into trouble in the open stretch." "Yes, sir." He was quiet for a moment. The range was empty around them, the late morning heat pressing down, a faint wind moving left to right at about 6 knots. Wren had already accounted for it. "Kovacs running the convoy security for Bravo," Bracken said. It wasn't a question. "I know, sir." He put in a formal objection to your reinstatement on rotation. Wren kept her expression neutral. "I understand, sir. I didn't honor it." Bracken looked at her directly. "I want to be clear about something, Halloran. I read your full record. Every evaluation, every range qualification, every note your previous CO ever put in writing about you. And then I watched you for a week on this base, watched what you did with the assignments you were handed, and how you handled what happened in the motor pool." He paused. "You're the best shooter on this installation, possibly the best I've seen at your rank. And you've been inventorying medical supplies." She said nothing. "That ends today," he said. "You're on full rotation. Maren Okafor is confirmed as your spotter. Her request was already in, and I approved it this morning. You'll get the full mission brief for Bravo rotation this afternoon." He turned to leave, then stopped the same way he'd stopped in the supply room doorway, like he always thought of one more thing that mattered. "Kovac is a good soldier, Halloran. He's made serious errors in judgment. Those are not the same thing." "No, sir," she agreed. "They're not." He left. She turned back to the range, reset her position to the elevated angle, breathed, shot. The steel rang at 860 meters, the sound arriving a half second after the impact carried on the left to right wind. Perfect. The mission brief that afternoon was held in the ops room, a rectangular space with maps on every wall, and a table in the center that had clearly been used for this purpose. So many times it had a permanent geography of coffee rings and pen marks worn into its surface. There were 8 people in the room. Wren and Maren were the last to arrive 3 minutes before the brief was scheduled to begin. Kovac was already there. He was standing on the far side of the table with Riggs and Yates, and when Wren walked in, the quality of the silence in the room changed the way temperature changes when a door opens onto winter perceptibly immediately, and in a way that everyone felt but no one announced. Kovac looked at her. His expression was controlled, military flat, the professional mask that years of service had given him. But his jaw was set in a way that had nothing to do with professionalism and everything to do with a man who had expected a situation to resolve itself in one direction and found it resolving in another. He said nothing. She said nothing. They sat on opposite sides of the table. The brief was delivered by a lieutenant named Carver, who had the nervous energy of someone dealing with information he wasn't entirely comfortable with. The convoy route, the timeline, the known threat indicators in the region, the communications protocols. Standard. All of it standard and all of it, Wren noticed, treating the Valley Transit as a manageable risk rather than the concentrated vulnerability that she and Maren had identified that morning. She waited until Carver finished. Then she raised her hand. Sergeant Halloran, the open stretch, 800 meters, no lateral cover, elevated positions on both ridgelines. She kept her voice level, factual, the way she'd been trained, not accusatory, not theatrical, just precise. Has threat intelligence been updated for those positions in the last 72 hours? Carver looked at his notes. Last update was 4 days ago. No confirmed activity. Confirmed activity isn't the same as no activity, she said. The geometry of that stretch is a known factor that convoy security has accounted for, Kovacs said. His voice was flat, not loud, controlled in the specific way of a man working very hard to stay controlled. We're not walking in blind. I'm not suggesting you are, Wren said. I'm asking about the intelligence window. I heard what you asked. The room held its breath. Bracken, who was sitting at the head of the table and had said nothing to this point, said, the intelligence question is valid. Carver, get me an updated read before 1700. Carver nodded. Yes, sir. Kovacs' jaw tightened. Wren watched it happen and filed it. After the brief in the hallway outside, Maren fell into step beside her and said quietly, he's going to be a problem. He's already been a problem, Wren said. That part isn't new. I mean in the field. Wren considered this. He's a good soldier. Bracken said so. Bracken also said he made serious errors in judgment. Yes, she paused. Both things can be true. Maren looked at her sideways. You're remarkably calm about someone who threw your rifle on a car hood. Being calm is efficient, Wren said. Being angry takes energy I need for other things. Maren shook her head slowly, the way people do when they've just witnessed something they find both admirable and slightly incomprehensible. What does it take to actually get to you? Like, what would it take? Wren thought about it. Decker, she said. Maren frowned. Decker, the 19-year-old on Kovacs' team. He reminds me of someone. She didn't elaborate. She didn't need to. Some things were true without needing a full explanation attached to them. Maren let it go. That evening, in the last hour before the base went to minimal lighting, Wren sat in her quarters with the valley map spread on the surface of her footlocker and a small notebook beside it. She worked through the geometry again, not because she hadn't already solved it, but because solving it again was how she verified. Her grandfather had taught her that too. Don't trust the first answer, check it. Not because you're wrong, but because being right twice is better than being right once. South Tower, elevation advantage significant, coverage of both ridge lines complete with 3 degrees of overlap on the northern approach. Maximum effective range from tower position to North Ridge far end, 890 meters. Manageable. She had made that shot in worse conditions, in worse wind and training sessions, where the variable factors were deliberately stacked against her. She wrote the number down, 890. Then she wrote when variable valley creates channeling effect. Add 15% uncertainty window to correction calculations. Then she wrote 2 shooters on North Ridge minimum to suppress machine gun position at high probability location. She circled this twice. Then she put the pen down and looked at what she'd written. And she felt the thing she always felt when the geometry resolved clearly, not excitement, not dread, but a kind of settled readiness like a key turning in a lock. Everything clicking into the right position. She didn't know if any of this would happen. The convoy might transit without incident. The intelligence might be clean. The valley might be exactly what it appeared to be on paper, a manageable risk, a known corridor, a Tuesday. But if it wasn't a Tuesday, she knew the math. She folded the notebook closed, set the map aside, and lay back on the bunk. The base was quiet around her, the particular quiet of a place that is never fully asleep, that breathes in, shifts, and stands watch in rotation, and holds the specific tension of a location where the boundary between preparation and necessity is always thin. She thought about Private Decker, 19 years old. She'd seen him twice, once near the vehicle bay, once at the mess, and both times he had the particular quality of someone who was trying to look more certain than he was. The bravado of youth covering the normal, reasonable fear of a person in a place where fear made sense. He reminded her of nobody she could specifically name. He reminded her of a feeling. The feeling of being young and trying to fill a space that felt slightly too large for you, trying to grow into it fast enough that nobody noticed the gap. She understood that feeling. She had lived in it for years, not because of her age, but because of her silence, her refusal to perform the things that people expected from soldiers in social spaces. She had always occupied a space that other people found slightly confusing, and she had learned to stop apologizing for the confusion. Decker hadn't learned that yet. He was still apologizing, still reaching, still trying to calibrate himself to other people's expectations. She hoped he got the time to stop. She closed her eyes. At 0300, the radio in the operations room crackled with a report that 3 of the intelligence markers for the Valley Corridor had shifted. Not dramatically. Subtly, the kind of shift that could mean nothing or everything, depending on how you read it. The duty officer flagged it for morning review. By 0600, Maren had already seen the report. She was waiting outside Wren's quarters when Wren opened the door, coffee in both hands, one extended forward. "The markers shifted," Maren said. Wren took the coffee. "Which ones?" "Movement indicators on both ridge lines, separately, 6 hours apart." She paused. "That's not random." "No," Wren agreed, "it isn't." They stood in the early morning air, the base coming to life around them in its customary rhythm. Engines starting, voices, boots on gravel, the ordinary machinery of a place gearing itself up for another day that would be in most respects the same as the one before it, or wouldn't be. "Bravo convoy departs at 0900, Maren said. Wren took a long drink of the coffee. It was too hot and not quite strong enough, and it was the best thing she'd tasted in days. She looked out across the base toward the distant line of the hills where the valley sat behind them like a held breath. "Then we should be ready," she said. "We're always ready," Maren said. Wren looked at her. Something moved briefly across her face, not quite a smile, not exactly, but the thing that lives adjacent to one. "Get your kit," she said. "I want to run the tower to ridgeline angles one more time before brief." Maren had already turned to go. "Way ahead of you," she said. And behind them across the base, Kovac was loading his vehicle, checking his team, running through his own preparations with the competence and thoroughness of a man who was genuinely good at the parts of his job that didn't involve other people's worth. He had 12 years. He had the skills. He had the experience. What he didn't have, what he had never needed before and therefore never developed, was the particular kind of humility that allows a person to see what they are missing before the cost of missing it arrives. That cost was coming. It was 890 meters away on a ridgeline that nobody had checked in 4 days, in a valley that looked manageable on paper and was something else entirely on the ground. And the only person on that base who had done the full math, who had sat with the valley's geometry in a quiet room at night and run the numbers until they stopped lying to her, was a 5'0" sergeant who had been assigned to inventory medical supplies because a man with 12 years in and a laugh that filled a room had decided she didn't belong. She was ready. She had been ready for a long time. And in 2 hours and 47 minutes, the radio was going to tell the truth about what that meant. The convoy departed at 0900 exactly, and Wren watched it go from the edge of the motor pool with her kit already packed and her rifle already slung, because she had learned a long time ago that the difference between ready and almost ready was the difference between being useful and being late. 6 vehicles, 2 MRAPs, 3 lighter transports, 1 command vehicle with Kovac riding in the second position from the front, the way senior NCOs do when they want to maintain oversight without being the first thing that gets hit. 17 soldiers total, including Private Decker, who Wren spotted in the third vehicle, sitting with his rifle across his knees and his jaw set in that particular way that young soldiers set their jaws when they are trying to look like they have done this before. She watched until the last vehicle cleared the gate. Then she turned to Maren. "What's the current read on the markers?" she said. Maren had her tablet in her hand. She'd been watching the signals feed since 0500. "Stable since 07, no new movement." She paused, which could mean nothing changed, or it could mean they stopped moving because they're already in position. "That's what I think," Wren said. "I know," Maren said. "That's why I've been standing here with my kit on for the last 40 minutes. They went to find Bracken. He was in the ops room, standing over the communications console with Lieutenant Carver and 2 signals techs tracking the convoy's progress on the route map. He looked up when they walked in, and his expression told Wren that he had read the same intelligence updates she and Maren had been looking at, and he had drawn some of the same conclusions. Halloran it, he said. The markers, sir, she said. If they went static at 07, that's 2 hours before convoy departure. That's enough time to set and hold a position. Bracken looked at the map. The convoy's projected route traced a blue line through the valley corridor, in through the south entry, 800 meters of open floor north exit. Clean on paper. A known route, a managed risk. Carver Bracken said, "What's our current contact with the convoy?" "Comms check at 0915, sir. All green. Next scheduled at 0945. Bracken looked at the clock. 0922. 23 minutes until they'd hear anything. The convoy would be in the valley corridor in approximately 18 minutes at current speed. The math was simple, and it was bad. "Sir," Wren said, "if it goes wrong in the valley, the only position with full coverage of both ridgelines is the south tower. I've run the geometry. Everything else is partial coverage at best." "I know," Bracken said quietly. "If you want me pre-positioned, I can't send you into that tower on a prediction, Halloran. I need contact confirmed." She understood. She didn't like it, but she understood it. You don't deploy assets based on math and instinct alone, not officially, not through proper channels. You wait for the thing to happen, and then you respond to the thing that happened. It was the oldest and most frustrating tension in military operations, the gap between knowing something is likely and being authorized to act on that knowledge before it becomes certainty. "Then I'll be at the tower door," she said. "Maren with me. The moment contact is confirmed." "The moment contact is confirmed." Bracken said, "You have my authorization. Don't wait for the order. Move." She nodded. "Yes, sir." She and Maren were already moving before he finished the sentence. 0928. They reached the South Tower base and Wren ran her final equipment check with the efficiency of someone who had done it so many times it had become a single fluid motion. Magazine seated bolt function, confirmed scope caps off, wind meter clipped to her left wrist, radio on channel 4. Maren did her own check beside her spotting scope assembled and ready data card in hand. The particular focused quiet of someone whose mind has already entered the space of work and left everything else outside it. The radio was silent. 0931, 0934. Maren said without looking up from her scope setup. "Tell me something. When you're in the position in the moment before the shot, what do you actually think about?" Wren considered this. "Nothing," she said. "That's the point. If you're thinking you're late, nothing at all. My grandfather used to say the shot happens before you pull the trigger. The pulling is just the last step. Everything before it is the real work." Maren was quiet for a moment. "That's either very profound or very unsettling." "Probably both." 0938. The radio crackled. Not a check-in, not the scheduled 0945 contact. This was unscheduled, which meant only one thing, and both of them knew it before the first word came through. The voice on the radio was Kovacs. And the thing that hit Wren hardest, harder than the words themselves, harder than the information contained in them, was the fact that for the first time since she had known his voice, it was not controlled. The flatness was gone. The authority was gone. What was left was the stripped-down, raw-edged sound of a man who had just had the ground pulled out from under him and was still in the process of understanding what falling felt like. "Contact! Contact! Valley corridor, both ridge lines. We are taking fire from elevated positions north and south. Vehicles 3 and 4 are stopped engine damage. We have wounded. Repeat, we have wounded. I need..." A burst of static, something loud and percussive in the background, that needed no explanation. "I need air support or I need a shooter command. Someone give me something right now." Wren was already moving up the tower stairs. "Go," Maren said right behind her. The stairs were concrete and steep, and they took them fast. Wren's boots hitting each step with the precision of someone who was counting without counting. Her breathing controlled and deliberate even as her body pushed hard, because controlled breathing at altitude and under stress was not a luxury. It was a requirement, and she had trained it into herself so deeply that it happened now without conscious effort. They came out onto the tower platform, and the valley opened up in front of them, and Wren saw it all in one fast total read, the way a shooter sees, which is different from the way other people see, which takes in the whole picture simultaneously and begins prioritizing targets before the conscious mind has finished cataloging them. Vehicles 3 and 4 were stopped at the midpoint of the open stretch. Vehicle 3 had smoke coming from its front end. Figures down on the valley floor, she counted 3, possibly 4 soldiers using the vehicles for cover, which was the right call, but only bought time because the elevated angles on the ridgelines negated most of the vehicle's protective value. North ridgeline movement multiple positions, she tracked them with the scope and began mapping. South ridgeline same. She was on the rifle in 4 seconds. North ridge rightmost position, I have a shooter at approximately 850, she said. Her voice was the same voice she used in the supply room in the range sessions in the ops room briefing. Completely level, the same instrument, the same calibration, the same steadiness. Wind, Maren was already reading. Left to right, 9 knots variable. Dial up 0.3, come left 1. Wren adjusted, settled. The crosshairs found the position. She confirmed the target. She breathed out. She pulled. The radio was still transmitting from the valley floor. Kovac's voice calling positions, calling for support. The operational training holding. Even as the situation deteriorated, she heard it as background processed it, as data absorbed what was useful and let the rest pass through without interfering with the work. Hit, Maren said. Flat professional, the spotter's confirmation. Next target, North Ridge, second position from left. 870. Wind is holding. Wren was already moving the rifle. Down in the valley, something had changed on the North Ridge line. The rate of fire coming from the rightmost position had stopped. One of the soldiers pinned behind Vehicle 3 registered this and shifted position, getting lower, getting better cover. Small adjustment, but alive to make it. 870, Maren said. Left 1 hold elevation. Wren held. Shot. Hit, Maren confirmed. In the ops room, Bracken was on the radio. Convoy lead, this is command. We have shooter active in South Tower. Identify your most critical threat. Kovac's voice came back, and it was steadier now. Not because the situation was better, but because something had changed in the air above him, something had intervened, and even in the chaos of an ambush, a soldier's body knows when the calculus has shifted. Northridge machine gun. High position far end. It's pinning everything. If that goes down, we can move the wounded. Bracken's voice came through Wren's radio. Halloran, North Ridge, far end, machine gun position. She had already found it. Range, she said to Maren. Maren read the laser. 889 meters. She said it without any particular emphasis, the way you'd rate a temperature or a time. 889 meters. The number she had written in her notebook 2 nights ago circled, accounted for. The number she had built her geometry around. The number that was now simply the next problem in a sequence of problems. Each one solvable if you stayed still and did the math. Wind is shifting, Maren said. Hold 3 seconds, okay. Right 2 dial up 0.4. Wren adjusted. Her whole world narrowed to the information in the scope, in the feel of the trigger, in the sound of her own breathing, which was slow and even, and completely out of proportion to everything happening around her, which was the whole point, which had always been the whole point. She shot. The machine gun position went silent. The valley floor shifted. Not quiet, it was still a firefight. It was still chaos and smoke, and the particular violence of a situation where multiple people are trying desperately not to die. But the specific suppressing, movement-killing weight of that machine gun was gone, and when Wren felt the change in the radio traffic before anyone announced it, the voices on the convoy channel changed pitch, changed pace. The paralysis cracked open. Machine gun is down, Kovac's voice said, stripped of everything except fact. Machine gun is down. Bravo 3, move the wounded now. Use vehicle 2 for cover, move. Maren said quietly beside her, that's 3. Wren was already scanning. South Ridge, talk to me. South Ridge has movement 2 positions. Left position is active fire. Right position, I think they're maneuvering. They may be trying to change angle. Left position, first, range. 820. Wind is still variable. Left 1 hold elevation. Shot. Hit. Right position is moving. They're going lateral, trying to get a new angle on the vehicles. Maren tracked. They're going to hit the far end of the south wall. New range 860 when they stop. Tell me when. 15 seconds. Maren watched. The scope followed the movement with the trained patience of someone who had learned to read intent, not just position to watch, not where a person was, but where their movement said they were going. 10, 5, stopping. Wind. Right 1, hold. Wren shot. The south ridge went quiet. 5 total, Maren said. And then more movement, Northridge. They're reorganizing. Bracken's voice on the radio, Halloran convoy is attempting to move Vehicle 3. They need 60 seconds of suppression on the North Ridge to get it running or get the wounded transferred. Copy, she said. And to Maren, call everything you see. What followed was not 60 seconds. It felt like neither more nor less than exactly what it was, a sequence of problems each one solved in order, each one measured and calculated and acted on with the complete unwavering focus of a woman who had been training for this since she was 10 years old on a flat plain, with the wind in her face and her grandfather's voice in her ear. Northridge's second cluster of positions. She worked left to right the way she'd been taught to clear systematic no gaps. Maren called corrections, and Wren integrated them without conscious thought the way breathing is integrated automatically, the body knowing before the mind catches up. 6, 7, 8. The radio told her things in pieces. Vehicle 3 was moving, being pushed manually, soldiers exposed on the valley floor for 30 seconds. That felt like 30 minutes for everyone involved, the wounded being loaded under fire, the convoy trying to compress itself into a tighter formation that could actually move rather than a dispersed one that could only wait. 9. South Ridge new movement. Left 2 dial down, point 2, Maren said. Shot. 10. Convoy is moving, Bracken said. North exit, they need the North Ridge clear. She was already working the North Ridge. 11, 12. At 12, Maren said sharply, Tower base, left side, I have movement at the tower base. Wren pulled off the rifle. She didn't hesitate. She didn't think about it. The calculation happened in a fraction of a second, and the answer was clear: threat. At the base changes the geometry entirely. The long gun is wrong for this range, and wrong tools get people killed. She transitioned. The 2 men who came up the tower stairs were fast and they were committed, and they were not prepared for what met them at the top, which was a woman who had already put the rifle down and was moving toward the door before they finished climbing, because waiting for a close-range threat to reach your position is a choice that only gets made by people who haven't thought clearly about the geometry of stairwells. It was over in seconds, not clean. Nothing at close range is clean, but it was decisive, which was the only thing that mattered. She went back to the rifle. Where are we? She said. Maren's voice was steady. She had not moved from the spotting scope. Northridge still has positions. I count 2 more active. Convoy is at the north exit, but they're stopped. One of the wounded vehicles can't make the turn. Range. Far position 890, near position 820. Near one first. She settled. She breathed. She found the stillness in the middle of everything that was not still. Wind. Left 1 hold iron. 13. Far position. Right 2 dial up point 4. 14. Maren scanned. 30 seconds of silence, not empty silence, but the working silence of a spotter reading a battlefield processing cataloging. Then 1 more. South Ridge new position, they moved up. 8:30. They're taking angle on the convoy at the north exit. Wren found it. The crosshair settled. She thought of nothing. She was past thinking. She was in the place her grandfather had described to her when she was too young to fully understand it. The place past calculation, where the body has absorbed the math so completely that it operates without the mind's interference. Where the shot happens before the trigger moves. Where stillness is not the absence of action, but the ground from which all action grows. She pulled. 15 confirmed. Then she kept scanning because 15 didn't mean done. 15 just meant the most recent number, and the most recent number was only useful until the next problem appeared. But the North Ridge had gone quiet. The South Ridge had gone quiet. The radio, which had been a constant stream of urgent voices and broken transmissions, dropped in volume and changed in character. The specific shift from crisis communication to damage assessment, from "we are in it" to "we are through it." Bracken's voice came through and even filtered through radio static. It was clear that something in him had unclenched. Convoy is through the north exit. All personnel accounted for. We have 3 wounded, 1 critical. A pause. Halloran. Sir. How many? She looked at Maren. Maren had been keeping count. She held up both hands, fingers spread, then 5 more on one hand. 15 confirmed from the tower, sir, Wren said. 2 at the base. 17 total. The radio was quiet for a moment. Then Bracken said, "Get down from that tower. I'm sending a vehicle." She began breaking down the rifle with the same methodical efficiency she had brought to setting it up, each step in sequence, each part accounted for. Her hands were completely steady. Her breathing was controlled. The tower around her held the specific silence of a space where something significant had just occurred, and that silence had a weight to it, a texture, the way air has texture in certain moments, when the world has just shifted and hasn't quite finished settling. Maren was beside her, packing the spotting scope, and she was quiet in the way of someone who has seen something that has temporarily exceeded the capacity of words to address. Then she said, 17? Yes, Wren said. Are you? Maren started and then stopped and reconsidered and said instead, your hands aren't shaking. No. Mine are a little. Wren looked at her. That's normal. Is it normal that yours aren't? Wren thought about it honestly. My grandfather's never did either. He said it wasn't that the feeling wasn't there, it was that the feeling had somewhere to go. Into the work, into the next thing. She paused. There's still a next thing. She meant Decker. The one critical wounded. She had heard it on the radio and filed it, and now it was at the front of everything, the only calculation that mattered. Now that the geometry of the ridgelines was resolved. One critical wounded, 19 years old, trying to fill a space that felt too large for him. She slung her rifle and moved to the stairs. Outside across the valley, the convoy was reassembling at the north exit. Kovac was on the radio calling in the casualty report. His voice professional controlled the operational competence, intact and operating. But underneath it, and she could hear it even through the radio, even at this distance, was something that had not been there that morning when he drove out of the gate. Something cracked. Something that the last 40 minutes had broken open and could not be closed again. The vehicle Bracken sent arrived at the tower base. The driver specialist Yates did not look at her with the laughing eyes of the motor pool. He looked at her the way a person looks at something they are only now understanding the full dimensions of, the way you look at a view that turns out to be larger than you thought. And the looking takes a moment because you need to recalibrate your sense of scale. He said nothing. He drove. She sat in the back and held her rifle across her knees the way Decker had held his that morning when the convoy left, and she looked out at the valley that was already going quiet and already becoming history, and she thought the math was right. It was always going to be right. The only question was whether the right people were in position to act on it. And then she thought about Decker and the convoy at the north exit, and what a tourniquet applied in the right place at the right moment could mean for a 19-year-old who had his whole life on the other side of this valley. She thought, move faster. Yates, she said, push it. He pushed it. Yates drove hard and he drove fast, and he didn't say a word the entire way, which was the right call, because there was nothing to say that the situation hadn't already said more clearly than words could manage. The vehicle hit the north exit road at speed, and Wren felt every rut and stone in the track through the frame of the seat, and she held her rifle steady across her knees and kept her eyes forward and ran the numbers on what she was likely to find when she got there. One critical wounded. That was what Bracken had said. Critical meant different things depending on who was saying it and what they were seeing, but in the field, in the specific language of soldiers reporting under pressure, critical meant the window was open, but not for long. It meant someone was losing something, blood pressure, time faster than the situation could sustain. She thought about Decker, 19 years old, third vehicle from the front. She thought about what third vehicle from the front meant in an ambush that opened on both ridgelines simultaneously with the specific geometry she had spent 2 nights calculating. So, third vehicle would have been directly in the open stretch when the fire started. No cover approach, no quick egress, exactly the worst place to be when the ridgelines opened up. The vehicle stopped and she was out before it fully settled. The convoy had pulled into a tight formation just north of the valley exit, vehicles angled to provide maximum mutual cover, soldiers moving with the controlled urgency of people who are through the worst of it, but not yet clear of the consequences. She scanned the formation in one fast read, the way she'd read everything in the last hour, total picture first, then prioritize. She found Decker by sound before she found him by sight. He wasn't screaming. That was the first thing she registered, and it told her something important. Either he was unconscious, which would be bad, or he was the kind of person who goes quiet when the pain is serious, which was also bad, but differently. She moved toward the cluster of soldiers near Vehicle 3, and pushed through the outside ring of them with a directness that nobody questioned. Because something in the way she moved through space had changed in the last 40 minutes, and the soldiers around her could feel it even if they couldn't have named it. He was on the ground beside the vehicle on his back, one of his teammates, a corporal named Briggs. Not the same Briggs from the motor pool, a different man entirely holding pressure on his left thigh with both hands, and the expression of someone doing the right thing, but not entirely sure it was enough. Decker's face was gray-white. His jaw was set the same way it had been set that morning, when the convoy left that particular clench of a young man trying to hold his expression together. But now it was holding together something different and much more urgent. His eyes were open. That was good. "Hey," Wren said. She dropped to her knees beside him. Not gently fast, because gentle was a luxury and time was not. She took Briggs's hands and looked at what was underneath them. High thigh, arterial territory. The pressure was right, but not enough. "How long?" 15 minutes since he got hit, Briggs said. His voice was steady, but his hands were shaking now that someone else was taking over, and his body was allowing itself to feel what it had been suppressing. "I've been holding it the whole time. I didn't have a tourniquet in me. Mine got torn off when—" "Okay," Wren said. "You did right. I've got it." She was already pulling her own tourniquet from her kit she carried too always, because her grandfather had told her once that you only regret the things you didn't have and never the things you carried extra. She got it positioned and cinched it with the practiced efficiency of someone who had done trauma care training until it was automatic, pulling the windlass tight enough to matter, marking the time on the band with the marker she kept clipped to her kit. Decker made a sound when the tourniquet tightened. Not a scream, a short involuntary exhale, the sound of a body registering something it didn't have a choice about. His jaw clenched harder. "Look at me," Wren said. He looked at her. His eyes were working, tracking present. "That was good." "I've got you," she said. And her voice, and this was the thing that Maren would describe later to anyone who asked the thing that stuck with everyone who heard it. Her voice was completely different from the voice she used on the radio on the tower calling shots and confirming corrections. It wasn't the mathematical instrument, the calibrated tool. It was something else. Warmer, more direct. The voice of someone who has reached past professionalism into the specific human urgency of one person refusing to let another person go. "What's your name?" she said. "Decker," he said. His voice was thin, but it was there. "First name?" "Jake." "Jake, okay, I'm Wren. You are going to keep talking to me. Can you do that?" "Yeah." A pause. "Yeah, I can do that." "Good. Tell me something. Anything. Where are you from?" He blinked. The question clearly surprised him, not because it was strange, but because it was normal, and nothing in the last 15 minutes had been normal. "Nebraska," he said. "Little town, you wouldn't know it." "Try me." "Ainsworth." "I don't know it," she said. "Tell me about it." And he did, haltingly, at first his voice uneven and thin, but she kept asking questions, simple ones, specific ones, the kind that required him to go somewhere in his head that wasn't the valley floor. And he kept answering, and the answering kept his mind engaged and his breathing working and his body fighting. Which was the point. Trauma care wasn't just tourniquet and pressure. It was keeping the person present, keeping them connected to the fact that there was a somewhere else, a before and an after a Nebraska, and a reason to get back to it. Behind her, she was aware of the convoy reorganizing, vehicles being assessed, the radio traffic shifting from crisis to logistics. She was aware of Kovac somewhere in the formation, directing, managing, doing the job. She was aware of all of it, and she filed it, and she stayed exactly where she was. "How'd you end up here?" she said to Decker. "Enlisted out of high school. My dad was Army. His dad was Army." He paused. "Wanted to see if I could do it." "Can you?" He almost smiled. It was a ghost of one barely there, but it was real. "Ask me again when I'm not bleeding on the ground." "Deal," she said, and she meant it because she intended for there to be a later where she could ask him, and she had already decided that she would do whatever was required to create that later. Maren appeared beside her. She'd gotten there from the vehicle, hadn't waited to be told where Wren was. She'd found her the way she always found her, by reading the shape of a situation and moving toward where the work was. "Evac," Wren said without looking up. Bracken called it in. 15 minutes out, maybe 20 depending on approach. Maren crouched on the other side of Decker, took his wrist, checked his pulse with 2 fingers, and the focused attention of someone who knew what they were looking for. Pulse is fast, pressure's dropping, but slowly. Tourniquet is holding. She looked at Wren. He's going to make it. Yes, Wren said. He is. Decker said, are you two just deciding that? Like you get to decide that? Yes, Wren said flatly. We decide that. Breathe. He breathed. 14 minutes later, the medevac bird came in over the North Ridge, and the sound of it was the specific, unmistakable sound of a situation that has been survivable. Becoming survived, the difference between those two things carrying the entire weight of everything that had happened in the last hour. Wren stayed with Decker until the medics took him, kept her hand on his arm until the last possible moment before they loaded him, and when she let go cleanly. The way you release a shot complete, no hesitation, no second guessing, because the shot has been taken and now the math belongs to someone else. She stood up. Her knees were stiff from the ground. She noticed it and didn't respond to it. Kovac was standing 8 feet away. She hadn't seen him approach. He had the specific stillness of a man who has been standing in one place for longer than he meant to, who has been watching something and hasn't decided yet what to do with what he saw. His face was, she looked at it, directly assessed it with the same total attention she brought to everything, not what she expected. She had expected the controlled military flatness, the professional mask. She had expected maybe something defensive. What she saw instead was something she had never seen on Kovac's face in all the days she'd been at Outpost Halcyon, which was uncertainty, not weakness. Uncertainty, the specific, uncomfortable state of a person who has held a fixed belief and watched it fail in real time, and who doesn't yet know what to put in the place of the thing that just broke. He said nothing for a long moment. She waited. How many? He said finally. His voice was different, not the motor pool voice, not the ops room voice. Something stripped down, factual, asking a question he actually wanted the answer to. 17 confirmed, she said. 15 from the tower, 2 at the base when they tried to come up. He absorbed this. His jaw moved slightly. The machine gun on the North Ridge, far end. 889 meters, she said. Variable wind. Channeling effect from the valley walls adds roughly 15% uncertainty. I accounted for it. He looked at her. Really looked, not the dismissive assessment of the motor pool, not the controlled evaluation of the ops room. The look of a man trying to understand something he had previously declined to examine. You knew, he said, before we left. You knew it was going to go wrong in there. I calculated a high probability. I didn't know. You tried to tell us, in the brief, the intelligence window. Yes. He was quiet again. Around them, the convoy was fully reorganized now. Soldiers moving with post-contact efficiency, accounting for equipment and personnel, doing the 100 things that follow a firefight that need to be done before anyone gets to breathe. The medevac bird had lifted and was already a sound receding north, carrying Decker away from the valley and toward the people who could finish what Wren had started. Decker, Kovac said, he's going to make it. The medics think so. Tourniquet was on in time. He's young and his pressure held. She paused. He's from Nebraska. Kovac blinked. The detail clearly surprised him, the specificity of it, the fact that she knew it. How do you know that? I talked to him while I was keeping him present. She said it simply without any particular weight, the way she said most things. You keep them talking, it helps. Kovac looked at the ground, then back at her, and then he said something that she had not expected, that she had not calculated into any version of this day. I'm sorry for the motor pool. She studied him. He meant it. She could see that he meant it in the specific way that a sincere apology from a person who doesn't make them easily is visible in the body, in the way they hold themselves slightly differently from usual, slightly more open, less armored. He meant it, and it had cost him something to say it, and he had said it anyway. She said understood. Said, not it's okay, not apology accepted. Don't worry about it. Water under the bridge, understood. Because it was understood, she had received the information and processed it, and it was now part of her record of this situation, and that was all that needed to be said right now. He nodded. He seemed to know that understood was what he was going to get, and that it was under the circumstances more than he had earned and exactly what he deserved. He walked back to his vehicle. Maren appeared at Wren's elbow within seconds of Kovac walking away, because Maren had the specific gift of appearing at the exact moment when her presence was most useful without ever seeming to have been watching. Did Kovac just apologize to you? She said. Yes. What did you say, understood? Maren looked at her for a long moment. Not it's fine, not don't worry about it. It wasn't fine, and I do worry about it. Understood is accurate. Maren was quiet for a beat. Then she said, you are genuinely unlike anyone I have ever met. I'll take that, Wren said. The drive back to Outpost Halcyon took 22 minutes, and in those 22 minutes the radio carried the initial report of the Valley contact back to the base, which meant that by the time the convoy rolled through the gate, the story had already arrived ahead of it. Not the full story radio reports compress and fragment, they carry facts without context, numbers without weight, but enough. Enough that the people standing near the gate when the vehicles came in were looking at the convoy differently from how they'd looked at it when it left. And when Yates drove Wren's vehicle through last, she could see it happening in real time, the recalibration, the mental adjustment, the way a group of people update their understanding of something when the evidence becomes impossible to ignore. Bracken was waiting at the ops room. He had the bearing of a man who has been managing controlled intensity for several hours and is now allowing himself to begin releasing it carefully in measured increments, the way you decompress after depth. Not all at once, because all at once breaks things. He looked at Wren when she walked in, and he said, sit down. She sat. He sat across from her, and he put both hands flat on the table, and he looked at her with the full direct attention of a commanding officer who was in the process of understanding the magnitude of a situation more completely than any initial report could convey. Tell me everything, he said, from the moment you got to the tower. She told him, systematically in sequence without dramatization, because dramatization adds noise, and noise obscures information, and accurate information was what he needed to write the report that would go up the chain and tell the people above him what had happened in that valley and who had made it survivable. She told him about the first positions on the North Ridge, the machine gun at 889, the South Ridge movement, the transition at close range, when the tower base was breached and Decker on the ground at the north exit with Briggs holding pressure. When she finished, Bracken was quiet for a moment. Then he said, 26, not 17. The initial count was incomplete. Full assessment came in from the forward team 20 minutes ago. He held her gaze. 26 confirmed. She absorbed the number. Not with pride, she was constitutionally incapable of the specific performance of pride, but with the acknowledgement that a person gives to a fact when the fact has weight. 26. The convoy, she said. All 17. All 17. 3 wounded, 1 critical, all stable. Decker is in surgery. Surgeon says he's going to make it. He paused. Because of the tourniquet, because of the time, because someone stayed with him and kept him present. She said nothing. Halloran, Bracken said. And his voice shifted not unprofessionally, not into anything that didn't belong in a commanding officer's register, but into the register of a man speaking plainly without the armor of rank for a moment. What you did today, all of it, not just the shooting, all of it, it matters. I need you to hear that. She looked at him steadily. I heard it, sir. Good. He straightened. The armor came back gently because it needed to. There were reports to file, reviews to conduct, the 100 administrative and operational consequences of a valley ambush that survived would now have to be processed. Get some rest. I'll need your full after-action statement at 0800. She stood. Yes, sir. She walked out of the ops room and into the evening air, and the base was doing around her what bases do after something significant happens. The particular mix of subdued movement and elevated conversation, people processing in their different ways, some needing to talk and some needing to not talk, and most finding somewhere in between. She moved through it with the same steadiness she always moved through. Everything, her rifle still slung, her kit still on her hands, still steady. She thought about 26. She thought about Decker in surgery in a hospital somewhere north, his body repairing what the valley had broken, his 19-year-old resilience doing the heavy lifting that youth alone can do. She thought about Ainsworth, Nebraska, and how she had never heard of it until today and would never forget it. She thought about her grandfather on the plain, the wind in the grass, his hands on her shoulders, his voice in her ear. She thought about what he would have said about today, not the shooting he would have expected the shooting to be what it was he had always known, what she was, but about the rest of it. The staying, the talking, the hand on Decker's arm until the last possible moment. She thought he would have said that was the harder shot. and she thought he would have been right. Maren caught up to her near the barracks, fell into step without announcement the way she always did. "You know what happens next," Maren said. "Not a question. Reports, debrief, administrative review." "I meant with the base, with the people here." Maren glanced sideways. "You know they're going to look at you differently now? Everyone. It's already happening." Wren considered this. Let them look however they need to look. "Doesn't it mean anything to you being seen finally?" She thought about it honestly because she was incapable of answering important questions dishonestly. "It means something," she said, "but it doesn't change anything. I was the same person this morning that I am right now. The valley didn't make me different. It just made it visible." Maren was quiet for a few steps. "Kovac is going to have a hard night." "Probably," Wren said. "That's not my problem to solve." "No," Maren agreed. "It isn't." They walked. The desert night was coming in the way it always did, fast total. The temperature dropping with the abruptness of a place that has no buffer, no gradual transition, just day and then dark. The stars were starting in the east. Wren noticed them without stopping. The way she noticed wind and angle and distance, automatically, completely, without interrupting whatever else she was doing. She thought Decker is going to want to know how it ended. When he's well enough to ask, when Nebraska is close enough to think about, again he's going to want to know. She thought, "I'll tell him." She thought about the motor pool, about the rifle hitting the hood of the MRAP with that flat metallic clang, about the laughter, about every face. She had remembered them all. She had filed them all. And the filing had been useful not for revenge, not for vindication, but simply because information is always useful, and the only question is what you do with it when the moment comes. She had done the math. The math had been right. The valley was behind her, and Decker was alive, and 26 was the number. And the stars were coming out over the desert in the specific, indifferent way that stars come out without opinion, without judgment, without any interest in whether the humans below them had done something remarkable or ordinary. She went inside. She put her rifle down. She sat on the edge of her bunk in the dark, and she let herself be still, the real stillness. Not the operational stillness of the tower, but the human kind, the kind that costs something, the kind that happens after and not during. She let the day move through her the way wind moves through grass. She didn't push it away, and she didn't hold on to it. She let it be what it was. And then she lay back on the bunk, and she looked at the ceiling of a small room in a desert base, and she breathed slowly and evenly, and she let the stillness settle all the way down to the bottom of her. Outside in the motor pool, Kovac was sitting in his vehicle with the engine off and the door closed, and he was not moving. Kovac sat in that vehicle for 2 hours and 17 minutes. Nobody timed it deliberately. It was simply one of those things that people notice afterward, the way you notice the absence of a sound you'd been hearing continuously. The motor pool went through its evening routine around him. Engines checked equipment, stowed the ordinary machinery of end-of-day operations, and Kovac's vehicle sat dark and still in the second bay, and the soldiers who walked past it found reasons not to knock on the window. Because something in the quality of that stillness said clearly that the man inside it needed to be left alone with whatever he was doing in there. What he was doing, though, nobody could see it, and he would never fully describe it, was the specific grinding work of a man dismantling a belief he had held for 12 years and trying to figure out what the structure of him looked like without it. It was not pleasant work. It was the kind of internal reckoning that most people spend enormous energy avoiding, and it was happening to Kovac now, not because he had chosen it, but because the valley had removed every available alternative. You can maintain most illusions if you are careful enough and the circumstances cooperate. The circumstances had stopped cooperating at 0938 that morning, and what the day had left him with was a version of himself he didn't entirely recognize. He had been wrong, not tactically. His convoy protocols had been correct. His response to the initial contact had been professional. His management of the casualty situation had been by the book. He had done the soldier's job the way 12 years had taught him to do it. But he had been wrong about Wren Halloran, completely categorically and publicly wrong. And the specific texture of that wrongness, the fact that he had not merely misjudged the skill set, but had actively worked to suppress it, had laughed, had encouraged others to laugh, had put in a formal objection to her reinstatement, that texture was what he was sitting with in the dark, turning it over, unable to put it down. At 22:13, he got out of the vehicle. He walked to the barracks. He did not go to his own room. He went to the common area at the end of the hall where the coffee was always bad and always available, and he poured himself a cup and sat at the table and stared at it for a while without drinking it. Riggs found him there at 22:30. Not looking for him specifically, Riggs had come for the coffee, which told you something about the coffee's singular appeal even at its worst. And he stopped in the doorway when he saw Kovac and did a fast internal calculation about whether to stay or go. He stayed. He poured himself a cup and sat down across from Kovac without being invited and without apologizing for it. They sat in silence for a full minute. Then Riggs said, 26. Yeah, Kovac said, from one tower, one shooter, in what, 40 minutes? Less, Kovac said. The machine gun went down inside 20 minutes of her getting up there. That's when we were able to move. Riggs wrapped both hands around his cup. He was quiet again for a moment, and then he said something that he had clearly been holding for a while, that had clearly been working on him since the motor pool, since before the valley. Since the morning he'd stared at the floor while Kovac laughed. I should have said something in the motor pool. I should have said something and... Kovac looked at him. Yeah, he said, you should have. I know. So should I. Kovac said it flatly without ceremony. Should have said something before I started. Should have thought before I opened my mouth. Should have looked at her record before I decided what she was. He picked up the coffee, drank some of it, set it back down. Didn't do any of those things. Riggs said nothing. Sometimes nothing is the right response to something that doesn't need agreement or disagreement, that just needs to be said into a space where someone will receive it. Decker's out of surgery, Kovac said. Got word an hour ago. Surgeon says he's going to be okay. Full recovery, probably. May have some nerve damage, they're not sure yet. He paused. She kept him present, talked to him the whole time. Found out he's from Nebraska. Riggs blinked. How do you know she found out he's from Nebraska? Because I asked Briggs what happened when she got to Decker, and Briggs said she talked to him the whole time, and he heard her ask where he was from. A pause. Ainsworth. Little town in the Sandhills. Briggs looked it up later. Population under 2,000. Riggs thought about this. She shot 26 targets from a tower, and then she got on the ground and learned where a 19-year-old kid was from. Yes, Kovac said. Another silence. Longer this time and different in character. Not the uncomfortable silence of two people who don't know what to say, but the more settled silence of two people who are thinking hard about the same thing from slightly different angles. What are you going to do? Riggs said. Kovac looked at the table. What I should have done from the beginning. Be honest about what happened. All of it. He said it quietly without drama, the way a person states a decision that has already been fully made. Starting with her. The after-action review was scheduled for 0800 the next morning, and the ops room was full in a way that ops room briefings are not usually full. Not just the essential personnel, not just the people who needed to be there for operational reasons, but a larger number that had accumulated quietly, the way people accumulate around something that has become significant and that they want to be present for, even if they cannot explain exactly why. Wren arrived at 0758. Maren was with her. They took seats along the right side of the table, and Wren put her notebook on the surface in front of her and opened it and did not look around the room to assess who was there or what the energy was, because she had already done that assessment in the first 3 seconds and filed the results and moved on. Bracken ran the review. He was precise and thorough, moving through the timeline from the initial intelligence flags at 0300 through the convoy departure, the contact, the response, the casualty assessment, the medevac, and the final confirmed count. He did not editorialize. He presented the information the way a good commanding officer presents information in a formal review, factually, sequentially, with appropriate attribution. When he reached the South Tower section, he paused. He looked around the room. 26 confirmed neutralized targets, he said. 15 from the elevated position, 2 at close range when the tower was breached, 9 from coordinated suppression during convoy extraction. 1 shooter, 1 spotter, 41 minutes of active engagement. He looked at Wren. Sergeant Halloran, do you have anything to add to the record? She looked at her notebook. Wind conditions were more variable than anticipated due to the valley's channeling effect. I'd recommend updating the standard approach parameters for that corridor to account for a 15 to 20% additional uncertainty window in crosswind conditions. It affects targeting at any range above 800 meters. Bracken made a note. Anything else? The south tower needs a secondary access lock on the stairwell. The breach at the base was addressed, but if there's a next time, a mechanical deterrent on the interior stairwell would add meaningful response time. Bracken made another note. Noted. Anything personal you want on the record? She looked at him. No, sir. He held her gaze for a moment. Then he nodded and moved on. That was when Kovac stood up. It was not scheduled. It was not on the agenda. It happened the way unrehearsed things happen, with a specific quality of weight and inevitability, the way something that has been building pressure finally releases, not dramatically but completely. He stood up from his chair at the far end of the table, and the room registered it immediately, because Kovac standing up unexpectedly in a formal review was the kind of event that caused automatic attention without requiring explanation. Bracken looked at him. Staff Sergeant Kovac. Sir, I'd like to make a statement. For the record. He said it formally, procedurally, because he was a soldier, and 12 years had given him the instinct to reach for procedure when emotion threatened to be unmanageable. If that's permitted. It's permitted, Bracken said. Kovac looked down the table at Wren. She looked back at him with the same direct, total attention she brought to everything. Not hostile, not anticipatory, simply present and waiting. The way a spotter watches a position, fully engaged but without assumption. He said, I was wrong. What I said in the motor pool, the way I spoke to Sergeant Halloran, the way I handled her assignment, the objection I filed to her reinstatement. All of it was wrong. Not strategically wrong, personally wrong. I made a judgment about her worth based on things that had nothing to do with her worth, and I was loud about it, and I made it easy for other people to do the same thing. He stopped. His jaw worked for a moment. She warned us in the brief about the intelligence window. I shut it down, and she was right. Another pause longer this time, and it was clear that what was coming next cost him more than the rest of it combined. If she hadn't been in that tower, if I had succeeded in keeping her off that rotation, Bravo convoy doesn't make it out of that valley. That's not an opinion, that's math. He looked away from Wren for just a moment and then back. I'm sorry for what I said, for what I did, and I want it on the record. The ops room was absolutely still. Not the stillness of people holding their breath exactly, but the stillness of people who are inside a moment that they can feel is significant and that they want to let finish before they respond to it. Wren looked at Kovac for 3 full seconds, long enough to make sure the look was real and complete and not a performance. Then she said, understood. Same word as yesterday, same delivery, same absolute precision in the choice of it, because she was not going to say it was fine when it hadn't been. And she was not going to say she forgave him in a way that made it easy for him or for anyone watching. And she was not going to produce the emotional absolution that the room might have expected from someone who had just been publicly apologized to. She said understood because understood was true, and true was what she did. And the people in that room who were perceptive enough to catch the distinction felt it land in a way that a warmer response would not have. Yates, sitting 3 seats to the left of Kovac, looked at the table. Dre, sitting near the door, looked at his hands. Riggs, sitting nearest to the window, exhaled slowly through his nose, and the exhale carried the specific sound of a person releasing something they'd been holding for longer than they realized. Bracken said calmly, Statement is on the record. Thank you, Staff Sergeant. He looked at the room. We're not done. I have something to say. He stood, and when Bracken stood in a room, the effect was different from when most people stood, not because of size or volume, but because of the quality of his stillness. When he was upright, the sense of a man who takes up exactly the space he is entitled to and not a fraction more. This base failed Sergeant Halloran, he said. I want that on the record too. Not Staff Sergeant Kovac alone, this institution, this base, this command. We received a soldier with documented qualifications that placed her in the top percentile of precision shooters at her rank. We assigned her to inventory medical supplies. We allowed a hostile environment to develop around her assignment without sufficient intervention. He paused. That does not happen again. Not on my installation. Not to any soldier. He looked directly at Wren. We didn't fail the mission, Sergeant Halloran. We failed to see you. I am formally acknowledging that. For the record. The room held it. Wren looked at Bracken. Something moved across her face, not the ghost of a smile this time, Not the almost expression she allowed herself in rare moments. Something quieter and more internal. The expression of a person receiving something that matters and choosing to receive it fully rather than deflecting it. "Thank you, sir," she said, and she meant it cleanly without qualification. The review concluded at 0940. Wren walked out into the morning air and Maren was immediately beside her, which was where Maren always was. And for a moment, neither of them said anything, because the last hour had the kind of weight that benefits from a moment of silence before anyone tries to speak into it. Then Maren said, "How do you feel?" Wren thought of it, postponed it, really thought about it, applied the same honesty to the question that she applied to all questions that deserved it. "The same," she said. Maren frowned slightly. "The same as what?" "The same as I felt before any of this. Before the motor pool, before the valley, before Kovacs stood up in there." She paused. "The same as I have always felt. Nothing that happened changed what I am. It just changed what other people could see." Maren absorbed this. Most people would feel vindicated, validated, something. "I know," Wren said. "I noticed that I don't. I've thought about why." A beat. "I think it's because I never needed their assessment to know my own. I knew what I was capable of before any of them did. So their acknowledgement is real. It matters. But it doesn't add to something that was already complete." Maren looked at her for a long moment with the expression of someone who has just been given access to a room they hadn't known existed inside a person they thought they knew reasonably well. "Your grandfather," she said, "he taught you that too." "He didn't teach it," Wren said. "He was it. You can't teach that. You can only be around it long enough that it becomes part of how you understand the world." They walked to the far end of the compound, where the early morning air was cooler and the bass sounds were more distant, and they stood for a while in a comfortable silence that had its own language by now, the language of two people who have worked together under pressure and come through it and don't need words to fill every available space. 3 days later, Decker called from the hospital. He got Wren's number through Bracken, who got it on the radio and passed it to the hospital liaison, and the call came through on the base communications line at 1422 on a Thursday. Wren was in the range office reviewing wind data when the duty officer knocked and said there was a call for her, which was unusual enough that she registered mild surprise before she picked up. "Sergeant Halloran." The voice was thin and slightly rough, the specific sound of someone talking through the effort of recovery, but unmistakably present, unmistakably him. "Jake," she said, a pause. "You remembered." "I remember everything," she said. "How are you?" They say good. I don't feel good exactly, but they say that's normal." Another pause. "I wanted to call because I needed to say something. To you specifically." "Okay." "I was going in the valley when you got to me. I could feel it, the way things get slow and kind of far away. You know what I mean?" "Yes," she said. "I know. You kept pulling me back. Every time I started to go to that faraway place, you asked me something and I had to come back to answer it. About Ainsworth, about the town, about my dad. You kept making me come back." His voice was uneven now, not from pain, but from something else. "I want you to know that I know what you were doing, and I want you to know it worked because I wanted to answer, because the questions were real. You weren't just saying things to keep me talking. You actually wanted to know." She was quiet for a moment. "I did want to know," she said. "I still do. Ainsworth's got the best county fair in the Sandhills," he said, "in case you ever need a reason to go." "I'll remember that." "I have to go." The nurses is a shuffled sound, a voice in the background. "Sergeant Halloran, thank you. I don't have a better word than that. Just thank you." "Get well, Jake," she said. "That's an order." He laughed. The laugh was thin and slightly effortful and entirely real. "Yes, Sergeant." He hung up. She set the phone down. She sat for a moment in the range office with the wind data spread in front of her and the afternoon light coming through the window at the angle it came at 14-something in this part of the desert, and she let herself feel the call, fully, the whole weight of it, Decker's voice, the valley, the tourniquet, at the right time, the math that had been correct all along. Maren knocked on the doorframe. "Was that Decker?" "Yes." "He's okay." "He's going to be fine." She picked up the wind data. "Come look at this. The valley's channeling pattern, I think it reverses in early morning. Something about the temperature differential before sunrise. If I'm right, it changes the correction parameters significantly for anything before 0800. Maren walked in and pulled up a chair and looked at the data, and they fell into the familiar rhythm of it, reading, calculating, questioning, the two of them operating in that specific frequency that they had found in evening range sessions and refined under fire. And that was now simply how they worked, comfortable in its precision, complete in its efficiency. Outside the base moved around them in its ordinary patterns. Somewhere in the motor pool, Kovac was working, actually working hands-on, doing something physical the way men do when they need to move through something that can't be sat with any longer. Riggs was helping him. Neither of them was talking much. That was fine. The talking had happened where it needed to happen. Yates had requested a transfer of assignment not off the base but off Kovac's direct team, a quiet repositioning that everyone understood without it being formally explained. Bracken approved it within the hour. Dre had said nothing publicly and appeared not to be engaged in any particular internal reckoning, which was consistent with Wren's original assessment of Dre and which she had no interest in managing. The formal commendation paperwork was filed the same week. Bracken wrote it himself rather than delegating, which was unusual enough that Lieutenant Carver asked about it and received a look that answered the question without requiring a response. The paperwork described the engagement, factually attributed the tactical outcomes accurately, and used the word remarkable, exactly once a word that Bracken used, the way Wren used ammunition sparingly with full intention, and only when the target deserved it. Wren read the commendation when it came back with the command endorsement. She read it twice the same way she'd read her reinstatement orders, not because she didn't understand it the first time, but because she wanted to make sure it was real. She folded it and put it in the same breast pocket where the reinstatement orders had lived, and she went back to the range. She sat up at the bench, ran her pre-fire checks, settled into position. 800 meters. The target at the end of the lane, still uncertain. She thought about her grandfather. She thought about the plane and the wind and the grass and the specific quality of the light at morning on a stretch of land wide enough that the sky felt like a separate country above it. She thought about his hands on her shoulders, adjusting without forcing the suggestion in his fingertips. That correction was always possible if you were willing to be still enough to receive it. She thought about everything that had happened in the 10 days since she'd stood in that motor pool and a man had slammed her rifle onto the hood of an MRAP and filled the room with laughter. She thought about 26. She thought about Ainsworth, Nebraska. She thought about Jake Decker's laugh on the phone, thin, effortful reel. And then she let all of it pass through her, the way wind passes through grass, the way every variable passes through a trained mind on the way to becoming stillness. And she breathed out, and the world went quiet, and the crosshairs settled, and the trigger broke. And 800 meters away, the steel rang with the clean, irrefutable sound of a target struck with perfect accuracy. She cycled the bolt. She settled again. She was not vindicated. She was not transformed. She was not a different person than she had been before any of this started. The valley had not made her. The commendation had not defined her. Kovac's apology had not completed her. None of those things were the source of what she was. The source was a flat plain in a wind-beaten part of the country, and a quiet man with patient hands in a lesson learned before she was old enough to understand it fully, but young enough that it went all the way down to the bone. Stillness first. Everything else is math. She had been the one who could hold the line when everyone else broke. She had been that from the beginning, before the valley, before Halcyon, before any of the noise that other people generated about what she was and wasn't, could and couldn't, should and shouldn't be allowed to do. She had been it when she was 10 years old on a plane with the wind in her face. She had been it when she was standing in a motor pool with her rifle on the hood of a vehicle and 20 men laughing. She had been it in a tower at 889 meters with a variable crosswind in a machine gun position that needed to be gone. She had been it on the ground beside a 19-year-old kid from Nebraska who needed someone to pull him back from the faraway place, question by question, answer by answer, until the medevac came. Competence does not need permission to exist. It does not need acknowledgement to be real. It does not need the room to stop laughing before it starts working. It simply is present, complete waiting with the patience of something that has always known its own value and has never required anyone else to confirm it. She pulled the trigger again. The steel rang. She had never needed them to see her to know exactly who she was. She had always been the one they should have sent first.